Hamid, please.
Thank you. I've been asked to address what can be achieved by human rights advocacy. And my short answer is nothing or very little. So I thought that if I give you the answer, then we can end this session very quickly. But the whole point was that to say that although it involves the human rights advocacy, a lot of effort and a lot of time to be spent, follow all the cases, but the result may be very disappointing because what you get is not what you have set up for. It doesn't stop people knowing very well that there is very little outcome of this to continue with this work. But my suggestion is that if you're really passionate about it, victim-centered, and want to make a change, don't do it as your day job. Do it as a hobby. Let's look at some of the cases that I knew of or I was involved in, and we go through them step by step. Let's start from, this is 2006, a letter to the Commissioner of Metropolitan Police, Sir Ian Blair, asking him to arrest one Mr. Mohammad Khatami, who used to be the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran when he was arriving in the United Kingdom for a debate at Chatham House on 1st November 2006. The reason for this request was that during his term as the president, a lot of Iranians were arrested for peaceful demonstration. Some of them were tortured, some of them were executed. We had the cases for two of them that were tortured and were living in England with all the medical reports that how they had been tortured. It was horrible, the stories, and they had lifelong effects of that torture. We had the reports of the human rights organizations, including Amnesty and the rapporteur that the United Nations had sent for Iran. Submitted all of that to police. Next page, please. Can I have next slide, please? Yes. And carry on. Next one. We made a press release on this issue on 25th of October. Next one. And managed to get the Sunday Times to make an exclusive on this. So far, so good. Next slide, please. And here is the police response. Thank you. We have investigated. And then they conclude that they are not going to arrest Mr. Khatami, who probably came here to visit some important people, because they conclude that he was not involved in these tortures. It says that the additional material provided, including a reported speech by the Chief Justice outlining widespread misconduct by law enforcement officers, does not prove that the President approved or even condoned such misconduct. This is the British police saying that we don't think he has done anything wrong. There is a massive amount of evidence that this man knew. He also sometimes complained. Whether he condoned it or not, it doesn't matter. He is the president of the state and did nothing about it. Next slide. Now, there was a big event that, as human rights activists, Jeffrey joined, I joined, a lot of people to help establishing a people's tribunal by the name of Iran Tribunal. And we discovered and documented and reported on massive atrocities that had been committed by the Islamic Republic of Iran. Some 100 people gave evidence, a report was published, and we asked I think the high point in the whole process was writing this letter to the ambassador of the Islamic Republic in The Hague, inviting him happily to come and join the final hearing in The Hague. Next page, please. And I think the important one was that we wish to offer an opportunity for the Islamic Republic of Iran to appear before the tribunal in order to present its arguments and defend itself. Very, very useful thing to do. And I think this is I say it's a high point because that is more or less what has been achieved. It's just to ask them. But as usual, you don't get an answer to these letters. You don't even get an acknowledgement. The tribunal went ahead without the Islamic Republic's participation. Next slide, please. And it was covered. This is the more or less a cover page by and it's Iran Srebrenica. It's reported that how Iran eliminated 20,000 people illegally. Next page. And this is a further report about this thing. But the achievement of this tribunal, although I think was a very successful tribunal and provided substantial background to all these atrocities that had been committed and evidenced them and made them, it was a secret until this tribunal was set up in 2012. It became a public knowledge, everybody participated. But at the end of the day, the regime continued to carry out the same atrocities. If we now go to page 12, this is a letter signed by Sir Geoffrey Nice to the foreign minister here, giving the background of the tribunal, what it has done, and the judgment of the tribunal. If you go to the next page, now this is focused on this person called Mr. Mustafa Pur Mohammadi. He was responsible for at least 700 executions that were carried out illegally, extrajudicial executions, and without giving any right of defense, without even the poor people who were executed knowing why, how, without being charged at all. It was a massive abuse of human rights. And then what? The regime of Iran, after all this event, after we published the report, after naming him as one of the main perpetrators, gave him a position of being Minister of Justice in Iran. And this Minister of Justice continued to serve his full term with the approval of the parliament. In the parliament, he boasted about his role in the execution of opponents of the regime. And when Mr. Hamid went to Iran, he didn't say anything about it. This is the foreign minister of this country, and among other people, he visited Mr. Pur Mohammed. And if you go next page, is the answer that the Foreign and Commonwealth Office gave to Sir Geoffrey Nice. We are aware, we do anything, we take human rights very seriously. We have raised human rights again with Foreign Minister Zarif and so on and so forth. But if you go to the end of the letter, next page, please. There will continue to be areas where Iran and the UK have severe disagreements, but we continue to work with them. Next page. This is a letter that is written to Theresa May, who at the time was the Secretary of State for Home Office. The BBC report showed that 700 criminals and war crime criminals, those who have committed crimes against humanity and war crimes of different countries, have been given asylum in the United Kingdom. This was done by a reporter of BBC who made a freedom of information request and didn't get the list, but got the general number. So we made an effort to get the names, and especially those who came from Iran, because we knew some of them are hiding in the United Kingdom, with the hope that we can bring them to justice. The letter was sent to the Home Secretary. It was then sent by Home Secretary to another organization, then another organization. I get something around 25 pages of letters and replies, and I went all the way to the Ombudsman to complain. The answer was that we can't give you these details because the Data Protection Act stops us to divulge the information, and all the arguments about the act should not protect the criminals did not help. So nothing was achieved. Next page, please. But we got to know that one of those criminals is a person called Ayatollah Mohsen Araki. He was responsible for murder of, as a religious judge, he was in south of Iran, and he ordered a lot of executions, and actually he was reported to have been involved in torture and beating to death of one of the victims. So this time we wrote again to the police, war crimes team of the Metropolitan Police, giving the background of Araki and what he has done, and providing evidence that, including a long statement by Shadi Sadr. And this time we got an interest from the police. The police became very interested. And this is because the war crime unit doesn't get that many requests. So next page, please. So this is relatively a positive response. We engaged with the police and the detective that has signed this, Alex Phillips, discussions, information, something around 10 witness statements and background, and they undertook to go and investigate this matter. They couldn't find his file in Home Office. They came with all different types of excuses, and at the end, a short email saying that we are not going to pursue this anymore. Next page before, please. This is another example of the mass murders. Mr. Avai was a prosecutor in south of Iran. At the age of 17, he joined the revolution. He was appointed as interrogator at the beginning and eventually became the head of the prosecution for a major province. He did not have a high school diploma. He's the most uneducated person in the world to become a minister of justice. He's presently the Minister of Justice in Iran. And the irony was that he was going to talk about human rights in the 37th session of Human Rights Council in Geneva. So we thought that this is really a slap on the face of all those who had been murdered by him. The prison that he was running, not a single person managed to survive. Next page, please. So I did ask Philipp Grumbach, a very successful lawyer in Geneva, to help me to arrest him. Next page, please. And also asked Sandra Delval, another criminal lawyer in Geneva to assist us. The natural answer is, of course, that we cannot help because he has diplomatic passport. He will have immunity from suit. Next page, please. And therefore, we cannot do anything about it. Having failed to do that, we wrote letters. Next page, please. To 83 ambassadors of different countries. Signed, the letters are signed by Sir Geoffrey Nice, telling them how horrible this person is and at what time he's giving his speech. It's on Tuesday, 27th February at 3:40 in the afternoon. And every single participant received a letter from us with a copy of that wanted one. And next page, please, including the next page, please. Including the British Foreign Secretary. This time, I guess there was a little resolve. We saw when he was trying to, Mr. Al-Wahi was trying to deliver his presentation on the Human Rights Council, different representatives started moving out of their seats with a lot of noise and making sure that he understands that they are walking out of the session in protest to his presentation. So that was the effect of all this effort. Next page, please. And this is the answer from the Foreign Secretary's minion to Sir Geoffrey Nice, saying that please be assured that we will be supporting the human rights activities and so forth. So I went through this list of events to just prove the point that we can do all these things and get very little response. Next slide, please. Moving back to UK, is this is a letter to Theresa May, who was at that time the Prime Minister, and this is after Brexit, and they published a report that they would like to ask all the companies to list their foreign employees. And I thought that this is really terrible thing to start asking and naming foreigners in the companies. It just reminded me of the Nuremberg laws. So I wrote this letter to the Prime Minister saying that this is not acceptable. It's not far from Dr. Goebel's spin. I did get some response from that, but I don't think it's only to my letter, but it's to, next page, please. It was the outcry from all the press and all the groups saying that this is a mistake and it was withdrawn in a matter of days. Next paragraph. I don't know whether we call this human rights activity or not, but it's just being vigilant about what is happening in your own country. The Tory government signed a $1 billion deal with DUP to make sure that they will support the government after the election that resulted in Theresa May's government losing majority in the government. Next page, please. This is a letter that Geoffrey I and another lawyer wrote to, can we go to the previous page? To the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, saying that we act for Professor Joshua Silver, and he accused the government of being involved in bribery, in bribing a political party to support it in the parliament. Next page, please, page 33. And of course, they refer to for consideration by special inquiry team. Next page, please. And the inquiry teams, after careful consideration, have now concluded that there is no evidence available to the special inquiry team upon which there would be reasonable ground to believe or suspect that alleged offense has been committed. End of the story. Next page. And perhaps one of the most important jobs that I've done is to be counsel to the China Tribunal. And again, the high point in that massive work was this letter to the ambassador of the People's Republic of China. So Jeffrey said that it is really very pleasing to see that somebody like me, an immigrant from Iran, be able to write to the representative of the most populous nation in the world. Next page, please. And say to them, I would appreciate if you acknowledge the receipt of this final judgment and ensure that all organizations in your government responsible for these criminal acts immediately desist from continuing so. That, the pleasure of that, I guess, was wonderful, but the result is nothing. We did not get an answer for this letter. Next one. And this is the work in progress. We're going to work with, Arif and I are working on this to bring some, perhaps, recovery for our Baha'i community in Iran, which are being exterminated by the regime. Thank you. Let's take the slides out. That is basically all the points that I wanted to raise. There are little points that can be achieved by spending so much time and effort in human rights advocacy. But it's important that you are passionate about this. You know that the result is neither immediate nor very positive. It will take a long time for all these little efforts to become some tangible result, create some tangible result. I mean, the things, for instance, Arif mentioned slavery. This was years and years of effort by activists, politicians, and everyone else to bring an end to that. Or look at the universal suffrage. These are important achievements in human rights history, and it's been brought by activists, but it takes a long time and a lot of suffering and a lot of effort. If you don't want to go through all that, then don't do it from the beginning. But also, if you are passionate about it and you want to do something, please let me know, because we do have some opportunities in the forthcoming tribunals, people's tribunals, that we're going to set up, and we need your help. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hamid. Hamid's presentation would normally be part of what we call masterclass, and we would simply show you what possibilities are from us, the citizens with no important positions, and still to engage and to hold those who represent us responsible. So we are going to extend a little bit our discussion, because I would like to address Carol's question. Carol, are you with us? I'm sorry I did not present your questions in it, and I think I will first go to Arif. I think Valerie left us. Unfortunately, I couldn't thank her and say bye-bye to her. But Arif, Carol asked something before we engage into this a more general discussion, what can we do for advocacy? Carol Hodge, who wrote a book about UK and the Yugoslav wars in the 90s, and now she authored a book on Realpolitik and ICTY. She asked, can any real progress be made on the constitution without committed international participation? So what is your position and what does your research say about it, Arif?
I think probably Carol is probably hinting at the answer is that, and the answer is of course no, that what you need is many different actors coming together. So a combination of diplomacy behind the scenes, combining combining EU states, including UK, interests in the region with proposals for constitutional reform. As Valerie highlighted, there was of course there was a long process where there was a tension on the region, and the issue of constitutional reform was seen as fundamental, but for various other geopolitical reasons, the efforts on all of that were just left aside. And now, for instance, the focus, because of what happened with 9/11 and then the conflicts in Iraq and the Syrian conflict and the suggestion that there are large numbers of people going from the region to be fighters there, you know, a lot of the resources get diverted into anti-terrorism and other issues. And of course, the issue which gives rise to a failing state is the constitution. And you know, some of these other issues and problems and regional instability can be addressed by addressing the underlying source of the problem. And without international actors, you won't really get anything done. So I think what you need is, yes, some civil society-led bottom-up development and impetus on constitutional reform in Bosnia itself, but you also then need support from the Office of the High Representative, which is essentially the dictator. I mean, in a way, it has dictatorial powers to do anything in Bosnia if it so wishes, with a combination of incentives provided by the EU for future accession. So you can't forget that Bosnia and Serbia and other states, Montenegro, are all on the accession path. And the EU can very easily impose conditionality on what Bosnia must do as a state in order to enter the EU, and also can impose those conditionality on Serbia and other states which might be interfering in Bosnia. And then the UK obviously played a fundamental role during the war. It obviously was instrumental on the arms embargo and various other things that prolonged the war. And in a way, it not only has a duty, but a responsibility to be now an actor to ensure the peace. And in the context where the US and others have disengaged from the region, I think without their support and without some pressure emanating from the EU and others on individuals and also on institutions in Bosnia, then peace will probably be precluded long term.
Thank you so much. So Arif, I hope you will be able to join us tomorrow morning, because we are, after you participants will be watching Pax Americana and the Path to Dayton. One of the participants and negotiators are going to join with us. His name is Mate Granic. He was Minister of Foreign Affairs in Croatia in a crucial times when the Washington Agreement of March '94 has been signed between Bosnian Muslims and Bosnian Croats. And that was the basis for the future Dayton borders, internal borders. And he is currently advisor for foreign affairs of Croatian Prime Minister, who just won yesterday elections again. So what will be interesting for Mate Granic to tell us more about international roles, pressures, and assistance, and how this international role now develops or position. So I think it will be very interesting to hear from someone who was there then acting politician and now still is very close to executive Croatian politics when foreign affairs are concerned. And Arif, thank you so much. So Jeffrey, I'm now going to take your your question to everyone.
Actually, I was sorry. Which question is that?
Yeah. So you know what? We were once. I was just with Jeffrey by chance at Oxford, and he was talking to Lawyers Without Borders or something like that, initiative of young people and so forth. And Jeffrey at that time was representing in some indirect way Saif Gaddafi, the son of the former, well, whatever, leader of Libya, who was detained in Libya. Saif was detained in Libya, and Jeffrey was representing someone who was concerned about human rights of Gaddafi. So of course, when you say something like this in this die-hard human rights liberals, they say, oh, why should you ever? And so Jeffrey asked the audience of young people, even younger of you, and he said, whoever of you has written to your MP concerned with the human rights of Saif Gaddafi? Of course, no one. They were appalled by the idea that they would write to their MP representing their district and saying human rights of Saif Gaddafi have been here at stake. And then Jeffrey asked me, whoever of you had written to your MP on any subject concerning the human rights? I'm not going to tell you how many people raised hands, but the question to you is, how many of you have ever written any letters resembling Hamid Sabi's former initiatives? You, too, Nathan, tell us. Nathan did. Whom did you write and about what?
It was quite recently. There was a case of a woman who was working. She was a frontline worker at a train station in London, and she was coughed at by a man who said he had coronavirus, and she later died. And the British Transport Police said that there wasn't enough evidence to show that he had coronavirus, and that therefore the cough ended up meaning that he then ended up infecting her. And it was obviously quite a big outcry, and especially because she had underlying health conditions, so she perhaps shouldn't have been working on the front line anyway. And so that was, I wrote to my MP and a few other people about that, because I just thought that case was quite horrific, and thankfully it's being actually reviewed again. But it was only something that's happened sort of quite recently, to be honest.
Did you get an answer from your MP?
I did, yes. It's from I'm in an area that's like a much smaller party, so it wasn't particularly satisfactory, to be honest. But there were obviously other things in motion at the time, so which allowed for a more adequate response from the state, to be honest. But she was useless. Okay,
Arif, you did as well.
Yes, I think I wrote on the intervention in Iraq, and then I wrote about legal aid, payments on legal aid, and then recently I wrote about criminal bar reforms. But I have an MP who's on the right side on all, as I see it, on those issues, so she tends to respond saying I've done everything I can. So
I think Holly had a question, was it, as well? But before she does that, and I see we're running out of time, I want Naina and Hamid perhaps to help me with a couple of things, or help us all with a couple of things. First of all, is it right that the more you get into all these activities, the more you come to the conclusion that the victims are at the bottom of anybody's heap of interest? Second thing is, do you actually need to be like Hamid? That is like one of those models or dolls that can never be put down. Doesn't matter what you do to him, he's always back up, and he's doing it with a smile on his face. And the third point that's a bit more that's substantial in itself and very important, because victims at the bottom of the pile, nobody's going to represent them, and unless ordinary individuals do. But the other little point that I thought Naina might be able to help with is what's her view of non-governmental organizations, which 20 years ago we thought were salvation of the world, but maybe now they're not quite. Naina, Hamid?
Hamid.
Well, the whole idea is that if you do this not as your day job, you will be disappointed, but you keep going because you have your day job. But if you do it as a day job, it will destroy your life, because there is very little achievement very little pay. So my recommendation is that if you're passionate, especially passionate about the victims, like Nathan was, do it as your extra activity and satisfy yourself with just writing letters and complaining and doing what you can in the circumstances. But if you don't build your life on it, that's my advice. So you will have more longevity in the battle.
And what we admire in Hamid, in all these things, can put a smile because he absolutely, completely ignores his ego. It never touches him in what he is, what he does. He is diehard when it comes to persistence. And I think that's probably extremely valuable quality when you engage in human rights and politics. Yes, yes, Sarif?
I had a question for Hamid and Jeffrey as well, because they've obviously had many, many years of experience, far more than any of us, on working on these issues, particularly where there are no institutional structures or remedies for a lot of these problems. What would they do, with all this long experience, what would they do differently today than what they did, let's say, 10 years ago or 20 years ago? In order to get effective outcomes, I guess.
I'll take a moment and then I'll be able to pass to Hamid. More decades ago, I would have thought it would have been a good idea to become a politician. And I increasingly doubt whether, unless you're actually become a minister in charge of anything, even being a politician can help. And then, of course, we know that the power of politicians corrupts them so completely that they land up still disregarding the interests of victims 99 times out of 100. What Hamid confirmed for me, something I already knew when we met and first worked on the Iran tribunal, and what I think now is a critical lesson for us all to apply, is that the citizen, that's those of us who are not specialists, not in government, not running NGOs, should recognize that if there are underlying universal rights of other citizens that need to be respected, the only way you're going to be able to help them, or the most likely way you're going to be able to help them, is by defying the forces that seek to hide the truth from the rest of the world and revealing the truth. Even that will not necessarily work, because the respectable powers that be, like the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office and the BBC, will shut down information whenever and wherever they find it convenient to do so. But you have to be prepared simply to go on trying to open up the truth, as the Iran tribunal did. That was my first lesson in people's tribunals, and in defiance of authority. Authority needs to be defined, I'm afraid.
I totally agree that we need to bring the governments to accountability. It takes time. It has no immediate result, but I think it's just little drops that each one of us can contribute that eventually forces them to change their way, or sometimes doesn't. But you have to do what you can, but make sure that this is not your day job.
So basically, when you wrote to Theresa May, if things went wrong in the very drastic analogy that you went, you could always say and inform the people, citizenry. You cannot say you didn't know. You cannot say, Theresa May, that you were not warned about the consequences your policy could be, just by the idea that you can go and identify foreigners is a strange and crazy one, because we come from a mixed marriages, mixed races. Some of us have full passports, you know, so what's foreigner in the modern world? But, you know, it's an amazing way to put people in different categories and groups, as Hamid said. So at least this is some sort of notice and warning. And for our politicians, representatives, at least to try to behave and correct their behavior. Nick, you wrote something to us about UK government this morning. Nick?
Yeah, no, there's just an article, front page of the Financial Times. I'm not sure how much of this is new news, but UK imposes sanctions on Russians and Saudis over human rights. So this is, I think, a sort of belated attempt at the Magnitsky. And he does specifically say that it's some of the people who are alleged to have been involved in the Khashoggi murder. So a small step, but as Hamid rightly points out, I think it's a combination of small drips that maybe has some impact. So.
Well, also the fact, if we know that these things are happening, can we remain silent? This is another very important, not just moral dilemma, but we have obligation to speak up when we know that something wrong is happening to our fellow humans. So that's another reason why we should try to use channels to our disposal. Jeffrey, can you finish this, because I'm a little bit out of my depth here. So
well, I
try to think about something, but things are not correct.
All these things tend to be sort of, often it's anecdotal and it's single points of possible interest, but you can't put them together into an overall picture. But I'm afraid I ultimately do put them together in an overall picture. And I'll just give you two more examples. 20 years ago, or just under, the present Foreign Secretary was full on with the United States in obstructing my obtaining what might have been the very best evidence of Serbian culpability or innocence in respect of Srebrenica. Full on. He would have stood in my way. He had no interest in justice. He had only interest in the big power players. Yesterday, there was an article in The Observer that looked as though it reflected the sincere good wishes for uncovering the truth of Srebrenica about a man called Sheffer, who's always seemed a perfectly decent guy. But Naina and I have incontrovertible evidence that he's part of the cover-up of getting the truth out about Srebrenica. I say incontrovertible, almost incontrovertible. So strong as to allow me to say that, and to have written to him saying he owes a duty to refer himself, he's a lawyer, to his professional body for lying and misleading in public. Of course, he didn't reply. And that's just one of many examples, and it just reinforces my absolute firm belief that if you want to spend your life and at the end of it feel you've done something of some value, trying to defy the powers of suppression of knowledge is perhaps the best thing I can think of doing.